The night they threw my pot roast in the trash, they were laughing so hard, my son-in-law had to hold onto the counter to steady himself. I was standing in the doorway of my own kitchen, the kitchen I had painted myself. Twice. Once in 1987, when Harold and I first moved in, and again in 2019, when I decided the cream color had gone too yellow with age. I watched my daughter wipe tears from her eyes, the kind that come from laughing too hard, and I thought, I have cooked that roast every Sunday for 43 years. My mother taught me. I taught her. She didn't even look at me. I want to tell you how I got there, not just that night, but all of it. Because if I'd understood earlier what I was walking into, I would have done things very differently. I'm 68 years old, and I spent the better part of 2 years feeling like a ghost in my own home. I don't say that to make you feel sorry for me. I say it because I know some of you are living it right now, and I want you to know how it ends. My name is Vera. I lived in the same house in Dayton, Ohio for 36 years. Harold and I bought it when our daughter Renee was 4 years old and our son had just started walking. It's a colonial. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a backyard with a tulip poplar that Harold planted the year we moved in. He died in March of 2021, a Tuesday, just before noon. Pancreatic cancer. 4 months from diagnosis to the end. That was the fastest and the slowest 4 months of my life. After Harold died, I was alone in that house for the first time. Not just alone in the house, alone in general. In the bone-deep way you only understand after you've been married for 40 years, and suddenly the other person isn't there to hear you when you say something out loud. I talked to the dog, I'd leave the TV on all night, I'd set 2 coffee cups out in the morning out of habit and then have to put one back. Renee called me every Sunday. Her husband Drew was polite on holidays. They lived 40 minutes away in Centerville, renting a house I'd helped them move into 3 years earlier. They had 2 kids, a boy age 9 and a girl age 6, and from what I could see, they were managing fine, busy, the way young families are. It was Renee who suggested it. She called on a Thursday evening in September of 2022, about 18 months after Harold passed. She said she'd been thinking, and she thought it might be better for everyone if I came to live with them for a while. She said she worried about me rattling around in that big house by myself. She said the kids would love having Grandma around. She said Drew was on board. I want to be honest with you. I was lonely. I was lonely in a way I hadn't admitted to anyone, including myself. And the idea of having the grandkids down the hall, of being useful again, of not eating dinner alone every night, it pulled at something in me that I hadn't been able to name. What I did not do, and this is the part I need you to understand because it matters for everything that comes later, was rent or sell my house. I kept it. I hired a property management company and rented it to a young couple for $1,650 a month. The deed stayed in my name only. Harold and I had paid off the mortgage in 2015 and the house was mine free and clear. This decision, made almost without thinking, turned out to be the only thing that saved me. I moved into Renee and Drew's rental in October. I took the guest room, which was a decent size, and I brought my armchair, a small bookshelf, and Harold's old reading lamp. I didn't want to overwhelm the space. I wanted to fit in. I told myself, you are a guest in their home. Be gracious. Be helpful. Don't overstep. For the first few weeks, it was fine. I made the kids breakfast in the mornings when Renee had early meetings. I helped with homework. I did the grocery shopping on Tuesdays and always asked Renee what she needed. I kept my room neat. I tried not to be in the living room when Drew was watching football. I told myself I was being considerate. What I was actually doing was making myself small. I didn't see it then. The first sign was the coffee. I drank my coffee black. Harold and I both did, for 40 years. I bought a bag of ground coffee at Kroger on one of my grocery runs, the brand I'd always bought, and put it in the cabinet next to the coffee maker. The next morning, it was moved to the back of a different cabinet, behind a box of herbal teas and a jar of coconut oil. I assumed it was an accident. I moved it back. 2 days later, it happened again. When I mentioned it to Renee, she looked at me with a small, careful smile and said, "Oh, Mom, Drew's really particular about the kitchen. He likes to keep things organized his way." I nodded and moved my coffee to my room. That's how it started. One small shrinking, then another. Drew worked in sales and traveled 2 or 3 days most weeks. When he was home, the house operated on his preferences. The thermostat was set to whatever he wanted, usually 74 degrees, which I found too warm, but said nothing about. The television in the living room played what he wanted to watch. Dinner was served when he was hungry. These are not unusual things in a household. But I began to notice that when Drew was away, Renee was different, looser, more herself, more like the daughter I'd raised. We'd eat dinner together at the kitchen table and talk for an hour after the kids went to bed. When he came home, she sort of folded back into a quieter version of herself, and I folded along with her, and the house had a different air. I told myself it wasn't my place to have opinions about someone else's marriage. By January, I had developed a habit of staying in my room after 7 in the evening, not because anyone had asked me to. It was something that happened by accumulation. A few looks, a few silences, the sense that my presence in the shared spaces of the house after dinner was an imposition. I brought a small television into my room. I read a lot. I told myself I was just giving them their space. In February, Drew was home for an extended stretch because a trade show he'd been planning to attend was postponed 11 days in a row. By day 4, something had shifted in him. He was bored, I think, and frustrated, and I was there. It started with comments about the smell of my cooking. I had made stuffed bell peppers for dinner, a recipe I'd made hundreds of times, one the grandkids had always liked. Drew came into the kitchen while I was finishing up, opened the refrigerator, looked in for a long time, and then closed it and said, without looking at me, "I don't know how you people can stand that smell." I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure I'd heard him right. I asked Renee later, quietly, what he meant. She told me not to read into it. She said he'd had a hard week. She said I knew how he got sometimes. I didn't, actually. I was still learning. I stopped cooking dinner for the whole household after that. I'd make something simple for myself earlier in the afternoon, and I'd be out of the kitchen by the time they needed to start their evening. I kept my food on one shelf in the refrigerator, labeled. I threw away anything before it reached its use-by date because I didn't want to cause any kind of issue about space. That spring, Renee told me their lease was up in July, and they decided not to renew. The landlord was selling the house. She said it a little carefully. The way you say something when you're not sure how it will land. I said, "What are you going to do?" She looked at me. "We thought maybe we can move into your house, just until we find something. You know how the market is right now." The Dayton housing market had been brutal, that was true. Inventory low, prices up, bidding wars on anything decent. I knew this. I also knew that my tenant's lease was ending in June, and that I had been quietly planning to move back in. I told her I needed to think about it. What I did not say was, "That is my house." What I did not say was, "I have been planning to go home." What I did not say was, "I'm not sure this is a good idea." I said yes, because she was my daughter and I loved her, and because I thought it would be different in my own space, where I had standing, where the coffee cabinet was mine. I was wrong. We all moved in at the end of June. My tenants had left the house in good shape. The tulip poplar in the backyard had grown another foot. Standing in my own kitchen the first morning, I felt something unlock in my chest, relief, or something like it. Within a week, I understood that nothing had actually changed. Drew began immediately making what he called improvements. He rearranged the furniture in the living room without asking me. He put his flat-screen TV in the spot where Harold's old armchair had always sat. I'd sold the armchair before the rental, and I wished, standing there looking at the television, that I hadn't. He mentioned to Renee in front of me that the backyard needed a lot of work and that the deck was kind of an eyesore. Harold had built that deck. Renee enrolled the kids in activities, which meant the kitchen was chaotic from 4 o'clock onward, and somehow the chaos extended to my things being moved, my mail being set aside in a pile I wasn't always told about, my schedule being accommodated last when it was accommodated at all. I tried to remember, this is still my house. The deed is in my name. But a deed in a drawer doesn't feel like much when you're standing in your own living room and you don't know where your reading glasses have been put. The pot roast Sunday came in September, 14 months after I'd first moved in with them, 8 months after we'd all moved into my house. I had spent the previous week planning it. Pot roast, roasted carrots, mashed potatoes from scratch, the dinner roll recipe my mother left me. I wanted to do something warm, something that felt like the house I remembered. The grandkids had asked for it specifically. "Grandma's pot roast," my granddaughter had said on the phone, and that alone was enough. I started it Saturday night in the slow cooker. The smell by Sunday morning was the way a house should smell. At 4 o'clock, Drew came downstairs with two of his friends. I had not been told were coming. They'd apparently been upstairs watching something on his laptop. They came down loud and easy, opened my refrigerator, took out 3 of my Cokes. The kind with real sugar I buy at the Mexican grocery store, 12 for $4, the only indulgence I allow myself, and stood in my kitchen talking over me while I was trying to finish the potatoes. I said, "Dinner's almost ready. I made enough for everyone." Drew looked at his friends. One of them looked at the slow cooker. Drew said, "We're going to order wings." He picked up his phone. I said, "I made pot roast." He said, "We know," without looking up. Renee came downstairs. She looked at me, then at him, then at the slow cooker. She didn't say anything. At 5:15, the wings arrived. Drew and his friends ate them in the living room. The kids ate with them because the kids wanted to be where the noise was. Renee made herself a plate of wings and sat at the kitchen table with me for about 10 minutes before she drifted into the living room too. I ate my pot roast, alone at the kitchen table in my own house. I had made enough for 8 people. At some point in the evening, I heard laughter from the living room, the real kind, the kind that bends people over. I got up to see if the kids needed anything, and I passed through the doorway just in time to see Drew open the slow cooker, make a face at one of his friends, and dump the remaining roast into the trash. Not the smaller trash under the sink. The big kitchen trash can. He let the lid drop, and they went back to their wings, still laughing, and no one looked at me. I stood there for a moment. Then I went to my room. I sat in Harold's reading lamplight for a long time, not crying. I had gone past crying some months before, around the time I noticed that I had started apologizing for being in rooms. I had a thought, very clear, that arrived without drama. This is my house, and I want them to leave it. I called my friend Nadine the next morning. Nadine had worked in real estate for 30 years before she retired and still knew everyone in the county who mattered. I told her what had happened, the whole of it, going back to the coffee. She listened. When I finished, she said, "Vera, you never should have let it get here, but we're here, so what do you want to do?" I said, "I want my house back." She said, "Okay, call Paul Whitfield." He was an attorney she'd worked with on landlord-tenant cases. Even family, she said, Ohio law treats it the same. I didn't call Paul that day, or the next. I spent about a week sitting with it, turning it over. Renee was my daughter. Drew was her husband. My grandchildren slept down the hall. Whatever I did would have consequences I couldn't fully see from where I was sitting. But I kept coming back to the same thing. The night of the pot roast, no one had looked at me. I had been in that room, in my own house, and I had been entirely invisible. And the only person who was going to change that was me. I called Paul Whitfield on a Thursday morning. He was straightforward about it. Since they had no written lease, they were considered month-to-month occupants. Under Ohio law, I was required to give 30 days written notice. He drafted the notice for me. It was 2 pages, formal, completely legal. It specified the date by which they needed to vacate, 30 days from delivery. He said, "Do you want to serve it yourself?" I said yes. Renee was in the kitchen when I came downstairs that Saturday. The kids were at a birthday party. Drew was somewhere in the house. I set the envelope on the table in front of her. She looked at it, then at me. I said, "That's a notice to vacate. You have 30 days. She didn't open it right away. She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something move across her face. Not anger, not right away. Something closer to recognition, like she'd been waiting for this. Like some part of her had known this was where we'd end up. Then she said, "Mom, you're serious." I said, "I am." Drew came into the kitchen before she could say anything else. He looked at the envelope, looked at Renee, looked at me. His face did something complicated. He said, "You can't do this." I said, "My attorney disagrees." There was a conversation after that. It was not pleasant. Drew was loud in the way he got when he felt wronged, and Renee cried, and I sat in one of my own kitchen chairs and listened to all of it without moving. I had decided beforehand that I would not argue. I would not justify. The notice said everything that needed to be said. When there was a pause, I said, 30 days, and I went to my room and closed the door. They were gone in 22. Renee called me every day for the first week, mostly crying. I listened. I did not apologize. I told her I loved her and that I hoped they found a good place and that I would always be her mother. She called me selfish. She called me cold. She said she'd never expected this from me. I said I was sorry it had come to this, and I meant it, but I did not say I was sorry for doing it. Drew sent me a text message on day 15 that said, "You'll regret this." I did not respond. The children did not understand what was happening. My grandson asked me once, when Renee brought them by to pick up some things, whether Grandma was mad at them. I got down to his level and told him no, not ever, not even a little. I held him for a long time. That was the hardest part. That is still the hardest part. What I did the morning after they left, I made a full pot of coffee with the coffee I like, and I poured it into the mug Harold gave me for our 30th anniversary. The one that says, "Still my favorite," in letters that have worn down to almost nothing from washing. I sat in the kitchen in my own chair, and I drank it hot. I looked out the window at the tulip poplar. A pair of cardinals, a red male and a brown female, were moving to the upper branches. I had not sat in my own kitchen in the morning, quietly, without managing myself for someone else's comfort, in almost 2 years. It tasted like my life. I've spoken to Renee 3 times since then. It's been 5 months. She is still angry, but the anger has changed texture. It's less hot now, more sad. I think she knows. I think she knew that night in the kitchen when I put the envelope down. We haven't solved anything between us. I don't know if we will. I hope we do. What I know is this. I am 68 years old. I have 36 years of my life in this house. I painted those walls. I planted those tulip bulbs along the front walk. Harold is in every room of this house. In the deck he built, in the reading lamp he bought at a garage sale for $3, in the mark on the door frame in the hallway where we measured the kids every birthday until they were too old to think it was fun. I let myself be made invisible in the place where I was most myself, and I waited too long to stop it. I know that. I am not proud of the waiting. But I did stop it. And I want you to hear this part clearly. You do not have to explain yourself to people who have decided not to see you. You do not have to argue or justify or make a case. If something belongs to you, your home, your dignity, your right to exist in a room without apology, you are allowed to simply take it back. Quietly, completely. The cardinals were back this morning. The female sat in the poplar for almost 10 minutes, longer than usual, tilting her head at something in the bark. I watched her until she flew off. Then I poured a second cup of coffee and started my day. The morning after they left, I made a full pot of coffee and drank it standing at my own kitchen window, and I thought about how long I had been waiting for permission to do that. That's what I keep coming back to. Not the pot roast, not Drew's face when I said, "My attorney disagrees." Not even the 22 days it took them to pack and go. What I keep coming back to is how thoroughly I had trained myself to ask for permission in my own home, to check whether the room was occupied before I walked into it, to eat early so I'd be out of the kitchen by the time they needed it. I did all of that voluntarily. Nobody put a rule on paper. I just kept making myself smaller, one small choice at a time, until I'd nearly disappeared. There's something I've learned about the way unkindness works in families. It rarely arrives all at once. It comes in increments: a coffee moved to a different cabinet, a comment made without eye contact, a meal dumped in the trash while people laugh about something else entirely. Each incident is small enough to explain away. And if you're a person who loves the people doing it, you will explain it away, over and over. Because the alternative, admitting what's actually happening, is too painful to look at directly. I did this for almost 2 years. I was not naive. I was just in love with the idea that my family was better than their behavior. What changed wasn't the pot roast. What changed was something quieter. It was the moment I realized that no amount of patience on my part was going to make Drew see me as a person worth consideration. That was not a failure of my character. It was simply true, and once I let myself see it clearly, not through anger, not through hurt, just plainly, I knew what I had to do. I had to use my head. I had to think like a woman with options, because I was one. The deed was in my name. The law was on my side. All I had to do was stop waiting for someone to give me back what was already mine. People sometimes ask whether I regret it, whether I think I should have tried harder, talked more, given it more time, and I understand why they ask. I am her mother. She is my only daughter. The answer I come back to is this. I tried for 2 years to hold something together that Drew had no interest in maintaining and that Renee lacked the backbone to protect. At some point, continuing to try is not love, it's just habit wearing love's clothes. What I did not do, and what I'm proud of, is collapse into bitterness. I did not change my will out of spite. I did not call Renee's friends or post anything anywhere. I did not say things designed to wound. I sent a legal notice, I held the line, and I let them go. That is the only version of this I could live with. I'm 68. I've buried a husband. I've raised 2 children. I've paid taxes in this country for 45 years, maintained a home, shown up for every hard thing life put in front of me, the endurance it takes to do all of that, to keep going when you're tired, to keep showing up when no one thanks you for it. That doesn't disappear because someone younger and louder walks into your kitchen and acts like your furniture. It's still in you. You just have to remember it's there. The Cardinals were back this morning. I've decided that's enough.